Thank you for tuning into Hinton Cast. This is Maggie Block. I am the deputy publisher at Hinton Publishing. We are so excited to be sharing these conversations that we had with authors in the Pacific Northwest who belong to communities that have historically been under-invited to share their work, aka the kind of author we publish. Now, I need to let you know that these are conversations that we had in early 2024. There's a number of reasons why we weren't able to get these podcasts out earlier. The number one being that we're a really small team who are trying to accomplish a heck of a lot. That said, these conversations are evergreen. Don't mind us if you hear us talking about something in the present tense that you now know is in the past. The knowledge, the insight, the brilliance of these conversations are going to resonate with you today. And hey, better late than never, right? Without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic back in time to Marcus and myself. Thank you.
Welcome, lovers of literature, to the Hinton Cast. It is I, Marcus Harrison Green, publisher of Hinton Publishing, and I am joined, as always, by the esteemed, incomparable, amazing, the Paul Atreides to my Lady Jessica, without the weird tyrannical stuff going on in that, that universe of Dune. Maggie Block, deputy publisher of Hinton. How are you doing?
I am well. How are you? I am always excited to think of myself in the Dune universe. Maybe that's not true. I am often excited, but often terrified. I'm really excited because we are going to have a conversation with another Seattle treasure today. Yes. This podcast has been such a wonderful experience to allow me to read books that weren't already on my TBR pile, which is perhaps overrun by YA titles.
No judgment there, Maggie.
No, I love YA. I'm not sad, and I believe that there is even a YA title in Nicola Griffin's repertoire. But I was really excited that I got to read book one. Hild, and we're going to be talking a little bit about, to get those of us who've read book one and need to get onto book two of Menewood today.
Yes. And I got to say, I think it's per capita, Seattle has the most professional basketball players in the world, over, the meccas like New York and so forth. And I bring that up because it is a great parallel with the amazing writers that we have in Seattle per capita. I would say even, versus New York. And we are joined by one today. Nicola Griffith is the author of 9 novels, including Held, Spear, Menewood, and Ammonite. In addition to her fiction and nonfiction, which has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, Nature, New Scientist, she is known for her data-driven 2015 work on bias in the literary ecosystem and as a founder and co-host of Criplit. Awards include the Los Angeles Times Ray Bradbury Prize, Society of Authors ADCI Literary Prize, 2 Washington State Book Awards, the Premia Italia Nebula World Fantasy and Otherwise Tiptree Awards, and 6 Lambda Literary Awards. She holds a PhD from Anglia Ruskin University, is married to writer Kelly Eskridge, and lives in the great Emerald City known as Seattle, Washington. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We are so excited to have you. And I let you know right before we started recording that I was going to ask you a question that I hadn't sent you ahead of time because I hadn't seen your bio ahead of time. You were the founder and co-host of Criplit. Could you tell us, what is Criplit?
Hashtag Criplit was a Twitter, as it was then, chat for disabled writers and disabled editors and publishers. Basically, anyone in the Criplit ecosphere. And it began when I was diagnosed with MS in 1993, but I only gradually became disabled. And I reached a point in the early 2000s when I was using crutches, and I started to think of myself as disabled. And then eventually, when I got a wheelchair in 2015 or thereabouts, I really, I really thought about it, and I basically wrote a blog post called "Coming Out as a Crip," and so then I started posting on Twitter about being disabled and all the bias and the prejudices and internalized ableism that we all have, frankly. And at some point, I was like, people, we need a hashtag. It's People are using different terms here. I said, so we need a hashtag for Criplet. I said, oh, okay, hashtag Criplet.
Perfect.
And then I got contacted by Alice Wong, who's a wonderful disability activist, great person. And she said, I think we should do a regular Twitter chat. I can help with the back end of that stuff. And between us, we'll come up with the questions. And so that's what we did. We ran one about every month or two for quite a while. I think we did about 15 of them. And there were a couple of times when we were trending on Twitter. It was so fast and furious. And it was so exciting. All these people who had not come together in this way before, really talking and connecting and understanding just how crap they have been treated over the years. It was a very exciting time. And then it got to be too much work for certainly for me and for Alice as well. And we were both getting more and more involved in our own writing projects. So, but it's still used occasionally as a hashtag. But there again, having said that, I'm never on Twitter/X these days because it's just a bit of a cesspit.
Yes, yes, it is definitely best for everybody's mental health if they're not. I would say, but anyhow, so I do want to ask you about your book, Meanwood. The sequel to Held. For readers who haven't had the opportunity to read either, can you briefly describe the story you've created with these books?
Sure. Although brief, I can't guarantee I can be brief because the Hild and Meanwood are both very big books. I mean, between them, they're already longer than the entire set of The Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Okay, so these two books are set 1400 years ago in the 7th century. That's early medieval Britain, basically what used to be called the Dark Ages. They are the story of Hild, who is the woman who grew up to be the real life Saint Hilda of Whitby, who is a patron saint of learning and culture.
Mm.
The first book, Hild, begins when she's 3 and ends when she's about 18. And it's about her as a child living in really dangerous times and learning to she uses her acute powers of observation and her agile mind to appear to be able to foretell the future. And what that does, it makes her useful to the king, who's also her uncle, and it keeps her and her mother safe. Meanwood picks up where Hild left off and continues for another 4 years of her life. And that, how would I characterize that? I would say that is about a woman becoming and inhabiting herself, learning to lead, learning to build and use power, real power, not just on someone else's behalf, but on her own behalf, and always how to live life on her own terms. Hild in these books is not yet a saint. In fact, if you go into these books expecting saintly behavior, you're going to have a bit of a shock.
It's true.
Well, saints make the worst protagonists, I think. So this is great.
Yeah, they're boring, right? But here's the thing: nice people don't get to be saints.
Yeah.
They just don't. You never get remembered because to be nice means you're just sort of bland and you get forgotten. And Hild is not forgettable. These books it's about a woman who becomes a saint, but they're full of war. war and regime change, but also love and fear and joy, nature, lots and lots of nature, politics, hope, and particularly Menewood, how to gather, build, and grow community.
So basically, the summation is these books are about life, essentially.
They're books of life. They're and they're full of all these emotions turned up to 11,
Mm.
but they all have also have these really lovely quiet moments of peace and contentment and understanding and just a lovely conversation over a hot meal. So that yes, they're books of life.
Well, and that explains why they're so long, right? If you need to, like so many books will just be action packed or will just be contemplations about our place in the universe. And I think that Hild and Meanwood do a really incredible job of being all of those things.
Mhm.
Um, I am super curious. What do we, um, as people living in the 21st century, what do we actually know about Hild? And is that where it's like, is that where the idea for the story started? Did you learn about Hild and then we're like, I wonder, or did it start somewhere else?
Um, they're connected. So let me start with where did the idea of Hild come from?
Wonderful.
Um, it basically part of the story was embedded in me from being a child. So I grew up in Yorkshire, in the north of England, and people have been living there for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. That the entire landscape is shaped by human hands. So you might look at a hill, say, and think, oh, it's a natural feature. But no, it's actually either a Bronze Age barrow or perhaps it's the mound on which a castle was built. There's very little there that is purely natural. So to me, history and landscape were really intimately connected. And then one day in my early 20s, I went to a place called Whitby, which is on the northeast coast of England. And wow, that place, if it changed my life. I think Whitby is the place that made me really see that history was real. And by that, I mean, history is made of real people doing real things, not actors in a little historical play who are thinking, oh yes, one day this will be history, but real people just living their lives the best they could. So I was in Whitby and I went to this place called Whitby Abbey. I knew about the Abbey, but I'd never visited. And I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of there are some places in the world where the skin of the earth, the skin between this world and another world is very thin. But if there is a place like that, it would be Whitby. It's an astonishing place. So I went there, I was blown away, completely changed the way I looked at the world. And I thought, well, where did this place come from? Who made this place? And so I went to the little tourist booth, I got my pamphlet, and it said it was founded by this woman called Hild. And I thought, wow, I really want to know about this person. So off I went to the library to get a book about Hild. There wasn't a book about Hild. There was nothing. There was no scholarly text. There was no racy bodice ripper. There was no graphic novel. There was no kids' book. There was nothing
Like
about Hild.
women erased from
Nothing.
history? Is this does this happen?
Oh, yeah. I mean, she's amazing and boof, gone. Because history, you just obviously look at who history is
Right.
written by, certainly early on. So everything we know about Hild comes from the ecclesiastical history of the English people, written by the Venerable Bede, a monk, writing in the early 8th century. So that's about 50 years after Hild died. So what we know is that she was born in England probably the north of England, in 614. She has a sister, Heroswith, a mother, Breguswith, and a father, Hererich, or Hererich, or I don't know how you pronounce his name.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah. And he's the heir to the throne, but he is poisoned in exile. And so Hild and her mum grow up in the heathen court of her uncle Edwin, King of Northumbria. The king and the court, and so Hild, are baptized and converted at age 13. Then we have this gap of 20 years where we have no idea what she was doing. She joins the church when she's 33. Another gap when we don't know what she's doing. She founds Whitby Abbey and trains 5 bishops. She runs something called the Synod of Whitby, which was a big meeting that essentially changed the course of British history, certainly in terms of religion, which of course had very high political overtones back in the day. And she also, this is the part, one of the parts I really like, she essentially midwived English literature because she encouraged a cowherd called Cadman to write, to set down the very first, or should I say, the earliest extant English literature. So Cadman's song is like the earliest thing written in Old English that we have, and that's all
Wow.
down to Hild. But the amazing thing is, this is the part that really made me sit up and take notice, is that the part of Bede is about how she becomes a counselor and advisor to princes and kings who, quote, sought her advice and took it, unquote. Now, you think back to the fact that this is the so-called Dark Ages. This is a time when might was right and arguments were settled at the point of a sword. So for a woman 1400 years ago to still be remembered in those terms, like kings and princes came to listen at her feet and went, oh, yep, sounds like a great idea. And then they went off and took her advice. And these were warlords. We're not talking figures of state. Warlords came to her for her advice and they took it. So to me, this is like everything I have learned about history is wrong.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that.
That's all incredible. Yes, my mind is blown as well.
I mean, we call this the Dark Ages, right? But if you had, warlords and kings taking her advice, then we have presidents who don't take advice now from
that
from
hurts.
their
That hurts.
from
So
their colleagues.
what kind of woman, right? What kind of woman can be that powerful, and why and how? And so that's why I wrote Hild. I wrote Hild to find out. It was this giant controlled experiment to build the 7th century and put the child Hild in it and watch her grow and learn how the world really worked.
I have to say, I just recently came from Santa Fe, where the creator of Game of Thrones lives, George R.R. Martin, and I must say that what you described is much more captivating than the last 2 seasons, or even 2 books of that series. But that's another story for another day. All that being said, obviously you had to do a ton of historical research, I'm assuming, for this book. Can you explain to us, like, what all did you have to learn about that world that Hild inhabited?
Everything. Okay, so we don't really know very much about the north of Britain 1400 years ago. We have the only documentary evidence are things like Bede, and he was a monk who lived in a monastery, and he wasn't very interested in what women did. He wasn't very interested in many things that most readers would be interested in. And so what I had to do was go back to the material culture, go back to archaeology. I spent so much time reading what are often disparagingly called grave lists. What people have found in graves, or what the state of the bones were, what their teeth looked like, what clothes they were wearing, if any of the textiles had survived, what their jewelry was, whether they had knives or swords or loom weights or pots with maybe a residue of beer or mead. And so what I did was just learn what was actually there. And then I went and did research on so I would read things like the Norse sagas, which were transcribed in sort of medieval times in Iceland, but they are talking about an earlier time, and so they talk a little bit about things like cheese making before industrial process. And so I would look at that. And then I would read books about the 19th century. So, how people on the prairies would milk cows or turn cream into cheese or butter. And I would just start putting everything together. And then I would think, okay, so you're milking the cow, the milk has to go into a pail. What would that pail be made of? You couldn't put it in oak, for example, because oak would add that taste of tannin
Huh.
to everything. So, what kind of wood would you use? I thought, oh, maple, that would be great. But you don't get in. Usually, people use maple for small cups. You can't really make a big thing from it very easily. Um, and so I thought, okay, I know it would be sycamore because that does a taste of anything. It's great. And then so I thought, well, let me just check. So I went and did the research, and it turns out that no, there were no sycamore in Britain back in the day. They didn't come over to the UK until, I don't know, maybe the 15th or 16th century. So I had to research everything: flora, fauna, jewelry, weather, geology, um, every damn thing you can imagine.
Uh,
That is incredible. Yeah, one of my I don't know, guilty pleasures, although it's not really that guilty, is I love watching there's lots of people who talk about historical dress on
mm,
YouTube, and I've always just been very curious of like how on earth would we know what people wore in the early Middle Ages? And it sounds like the answer is depending on like what has survived in the grave is how we know.
Very much, yeah. And having said that, I mean, what survives in the grave will tell you how people were buried. It won't tell
mm,
you how they lived. I mean,
right.
they might be wearing an amazing, uh, like diamond twill weave, but it may be that they never actually wore that in life. We just don't know.
Yeah. I'm curious though. In your research, as somebody who sort of, as a hobby, loves history, and my father calls himself a lay historian. Some of the things that I'm always curious about is how like people through centuries and the ages are really basically just the same in terms of, in terms of we. I was just reading this biography of Augustus Caesar, for instance, and as he is uh, trading barbs and threats with Mark Antony and Cleopatra, who are his rivals at the time. They're talking about each other's lack of endowment, shall we say, in certain areas, and it's like,
Nothing changes.
right, and
Yeah.
it's like my God, like 3,000 years, and there's we haven't gone too far. So, was there anything in your research where you're looking like, oh my gosh, we really haven't come too far at all in terms of this, the human condition?
Well, everything. I mean, it's just so clear to me. It's always been clear to me, actually, that people are just people. I think if you look at the human architecture, whether we're talking how our brains work or how we digest food, we haven't changed for tens and tens and tens of thousands of years. Um, what astonishes me about how some people think about history is they think so much of today is a modern invention. They're
Mm,
like, well, they didn't have
Mm-hmm.
queer people back then. It's like, well,
right.
of course they did. There are queer people everywhere. We've always been here. We always will be here. There's,
Right.
yes, absolutely. They didn't have women who were very smart. Oh, well, of course they did. There are smart women now. There were smart women then. Oh, they didn't. Oh, they didn't. Definitely didn't have Crips. It's like, oh, they totally did have Crips. But I think one of the biggest things is that so many people really think that the early medieval Britain was completely white.
Mm,
And that is just such nonsense. Um, Britain had been settled by the Romans for 400 years. Now, the Romans were a massively multicultural
yes.
empire. I mean, certainly most of the troops who would have been stationed in Britain would have been from Sarmatia, the Middle East. They would have been from Africa. There would have been people from all over the world. And you just have to look at the trading goods. If you look at the grave goods, you can see there's lapis lazuli, there's amber, there's garnet, there's beryl, that is emerald, and these are traded from India, Sri Lanka. It's a multicultural world. So this whole nonsense of nope, there couldn't possibly have been any people of color, there could possibly have been any dykes, there could possibly have been any crips, it is just 100,000 million billion percent nonsense.
So can we assume, should your novels be picked up by HBO, that the cast will be much more diverse than certain things that have been picked up by HBO in the past?
Yes, possibly. We can only take things so far, but there again, having said that, I mean, why not? I mean, I
Why
don't
not?
think,
Yeah.
for example, Britain in the 7th century was 50% people of color, but there's no reason on earth that the TV show couldn't be. I mean, why not?
Yeah. Absolutely.
To shift focus a little bit, I absolutely love your writing. It goes beyond world building. It evokes a full sensory experience from feel to smell to sound to sight. How do you approach crafting prose that not only tells the story but immenses the reader in such rich sensory details of the setting?
How do I approach it? Um, Well, for me, I'm a very embodied writer. Everything's about the body for me, a body in its place. So for me, it's all about um, character is all about what a character smells and sees and feels and tastes. What they notice depends on their emotional state. For example, so if you have someone in a forest and they're looking around and going, "Ooh, that looks a nice sunlit, comfy place. The grass looks really soft there. Ooh, that is going to be so great." You might be able to infer that, well, possibly they're looking for a place to have a comfortable tryst. But if they're going, "That's a great place to hide. That is fantastic," then they're stressed, they're fleeing, they're running from something. Or into today's terms, for example, if you get someone walking through the forest looking at things in terms of bored feet, then you know they're in the lumber business. You can just, it's, and for me, the best way to immerse a reader is to give them all the things that we have, that everybody has. So the sense of smell, the sense of taste, the feel of fear. So if you can make the reader feel like their heart is thumping, then you are beginning to trigger their what are called mirror neurons, which is a part of the brain that actually lights up when you just observe someone doing something. It's you're actually sort of recreating their actions inside yourself. For a little while, you become them and they become you. It's a real tool of empathy. I think if you can persuade a reader to live, if I can persuade a reader to live inside Hild, then the reader is making the decisions alongside Hild, learning with Hild. And so the reader believes what Hild believes.
Mm,
And then, well, then I've got them. They're mine.
yeah. So I want to ask you, there are some writers like Aaron Sorkin who, whether he's writing about teens or 3000 BC, he's just gonna write in Aaron Sorkin's voice, and it's just gonna be just straight through. But so I want to ask you this, like, given the time period that the book is set in, how did you shift your voice at all, or if you did, to sort of reflect that time period and truly reflect the time that things were said, as opposed to just making it more of an Aaron Sorkin style where everything is going to be modernized.
hmm For me, it's all about the poetry. I read um, a lot of Old English poetry, and I read a lot of Old Welsh poetry, which is the closest you can get to Brittonic, which is the language that the Britons would have spoken back then. It's the language that's the precursor of Welsh now, the precursor of Cumbric and Breton. So yeah, I would read the heroic poetry and the Old English poetry, which is very elegiac, and it has certain rhythms. So Old English, the words are quite short, um, and the way we speak English now is very blunt and straightforward. The cat sat on the mat, subject, verb, object. Whereas the Welsh and particularly Irish are much more roundabout. And so I would think in terms of, again, it would come down to character. Back in Hild's time, where Hild was living, the British, the Welsh speakers, were very much second-class citizens. So they were, if you look at it as an analog of predator and prey, they were the prey animals, and the English, what most people call Anglo-Saxons, were the predators. And so a predator, their way of behaving and speaking doesn't have to be quiet. It doesn't have to be careful. They see what they want, bang, 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 they go get it. It's very plain. Whereas the prey animals, they have to sort of scuttle and they have to be quiet. They have to allude to things. They have to hint. And so for me, language really became a tool of characterization. Am I answering your question?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, 100%. One of the things that was fascinating to me is just reading, as you were talking about, like there's so many different ethnicities in what I would think of as Great Britain today that Hild is dealing with. You mentioned the Anglos, and then forgive me, the Britons, and then there's the Wheel, and then the Picts, and are these still like? Are these groups that we can think of as existing in modern society, or has that sort of all become sort of a greater British identity? Because yeah, I was just like, who are the Wheel? What is that group of people?
The wheel is it's a an Old English word for foreigner,
Oh.
which
Interesting.
is where the word Welsh comes from, actually.
Huh.
Oh.
Not what the Welsh called themselves, but what
Sure.
other people call the Welsh.
Yes, of course.
So real
Always.
Welsh, and it gradually took on the flavor of slave as well. So foreign, slave, lesser, subhuman is basically what it came to mean
Wow.
to those in power. So in that sense, yes, they're still around in the UK because whoever's poor, whoever's the underclass in that way is Wheel, but it's not an ethnicity so much as a label and a hierarchy. So the English, though, that's basically what we think of as Anglo-Saxons today. And I hate that term because
Mm,
it has been so used and abused by white nationalists, white supremacists to justify why England should have ruled the world and could enslave whoever they wanted. So I dislike it. So I prefer English.
mm.
Um, and now I'm sort of losing my thread a bit. So yeah, the English, if you think of um, certain white self-satisfied people in the southeast of England
Okay.
who have money, that's those are those are the English to me. The Irish obviously are still the Irish.
Absolutely.
Nobody speaks Latin anymore unless they're quite strange. Um, Pictish, nobody really speaks Pictish anymore. No one actually knows what Pictish sounds like. We don't have a written record of it. All we know is that some people spoke a language called Pictish. But it was basically another Celtic language,
Okay.
probably quite like British. And then Frisian, which is very closely allied to Old English. It was a Germanic language. So the closest to Frisian would be probably Dutch, I think.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So you say they're not ethnicities. How would you like all of these different labels for people? It's should we just think of it as labels or how? Yeah. How do you think of these different groupings of people?
I think that people saw things differently. They used different terms. It was more about you could be a Welsh prince and you would be treated better than if you were an English churl, like a poor English person. It's all about it's the same today, right? You can be if you're a head of state or a royal from any country, it doesn't matter what color you are, you get treated well if you're top of the pile. And the lower down you go in the various hierarchies, the worse you're treated by your fellow people, sadly. Um, but when it comes to things like are you Welsh? Are you Welsh, British, wheel? Are you wheel or are you English? That could change in the course of a generation because all you have to do is change your accent,
Hmm.
you know, do well, move across the county line and take up a new profession and then come back with a new name and a slightly different accent and it's all fixed. It's all this stuff is really mutable, malleable, changeable.
Right. Yeah, as we see in our current days as well.
Mm.
Um, so I want to ask you: did you plot, this as like book one in a series, or did you think that this was going, that this had legs enough that it could feel like various volumes, or were you just planning to write one book, and if you weren't, then
Yeah,
what brought you back? Yeah.
yeah. I actually, when I first sat down to write, I thought it was going to be one book. And then I got 100,000 words in, and Hild was still only 12. I thought, well, that's not going to work. So then by the time I got to the end of the first book, I thought, it's going to be three books. It's basically going to map. I hadn't intended it to be this way, but it would naturally fall into that whole maid, matron, crone kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing. It was like 0 to 18 would be the first book, 18 to 33 would be the second book, and 33 to 66 when she dies. Sorry, spoiler alert,
Oh
she
goodness.
dies.
Ah.
um, would be book three.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, great. Book two, I could probably make that quite short. Okay. So I started to write. And again, I got 100,000 words in, and she was only 1 year older. And I thought, oh, this is going to be a 1,000,000-word book. I don't know what to do. So at that point, honestly, I stopped writing and scratched my head and thought, I don't know what to do. And then I wrote a different book. I wrote Spear, a really short novel. And that fired me up so much. I thought, you know what? I need to get this done. I'm really excited about this book. And so I just charged ahead and got to what seemed like a really good stopping point and stopped. And it's still a massive, massive book. But it only covers 4 years. It's just that those 4 years are some of the most exciting and tumultuous times in early British history. I mean, in those 4 years, there are 5 different rulers in the north of England, all fighting over the same thing. It's like, I'm the king. No, I'm the king. No, I'm the king. So it's a lot happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was such an interesting time period to travel to. Like you said before, like these aren't heads of state, these are warlords. To me, this seems like some of the early times of the church of Christianity. Like obviously Christianity had been, like we're in the 600s. So like we've had about 600 years of Christianity, but like the church starting to like come in and being a formal organization, acquiring power is so interesting to me. And also, when I read about Hild's relationship to the priests that she is, like one of the many political dances that she's doing, it seems like a big part of what the church is doing at this period of time is geopolitics. What did you find to be the case in this period of time? And what are pieces of the church and the church's attempt to establish and institutionalize power at this time?
Well, my personal opinion is that all religion is about power and institutional power. I think one's own personal beliefs doesn't necessarily equate to power, but whenever you get a religious organization, that is all about the accumulation of money, power, and influence. I don't think that's been different at any time in human history. I think it's all about the influence. Um, and the thing to remember is that although the north of England, when the first book begins, that it is very heathen, uh, up until 300 years before that, it had actually been largely Christian because the Romans made Christianity their official state religion right at the beginning of the 4th century. So there would have been, and there would have been Christians in Britain even before then. So there would have been Christians in Britain for probably from about 150 AD or CE onwards. Um, and what happened when the Romans left is that the English came over, and the English were heathens. And so the places where the English entered the country kind of drove the Christianity away. It drove Christianity to the edges. So it drove Christianity to Wales and Cornwall and Ireland. It was, and some parts of the northwest, it stayed there. But in the east of the Pennines, pretty much it vanished until Augustine and his missionaries came over at the end of the 6th century. I think they arrived in 599 or something like that, and then gradually it started creeping up again. But then at that point, now you have a clash of religions because you've got your Roman Christians here coming up in the east, and then you have your Celtic influenced, your Irish type Christians in the West. And that's what happened with the Synod of Whitby in 664 was this final clash and meeting and decision about which path to follow.
That is so fascinating. I love hearing all of that. And yeah, the idea that like Christianity in England would have ebbed and flowed. I'm sorry, you're just blowing my mind. Are you ever going to do a series of history videos? Are you ever going to do a masterclass series? I would absolutely
Yeah,
subscribe.
yeah, because I'm not a historian. I'm a writer. I mean, I have learned all this stuff, and it's really cool. Actually, last summer I was invited to speak at the International Medieval Congress in Leeds. Leeds is where I was born and bred, right? So it's my hometown, and I got invited. The Leeds Medieval Congress is the biggest humanities conference in Europe every year. It's a massive thing. And I was invited to speak. It was so cool. So I went and I did my little dog and pony show with the slides, and I talked enthusiastically about Hild and what I'd learned. And then I said, okay, so audience, do you have any questions? And this woman stood up. I said, well, actually, and then she said that thing that all people dread, which is, this is less of a question than a comment. And I thought, oh,
Oh.
no. And she said, I just want to let you know that I became a medievalist after I read Hild.
Oh wow.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I was like, you can comment. Yeah,
Right.
if anyone else.
What other storing affirmation do you need at that point, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I say I'm not a historian, but there are some historians who became historians because they read what I had written about history. So, but I don't pretend I am not the final word on this stuff. I know a lot,
Mhm.
but they're very specific bits of knowledge.
Well, I mean, you obviously went to the Dark Ages with Hild, but do you see yourself maybe revisiting European history at some point? I mean, it is rich with conflict, as we know, and I was actually just listening to the Revolutions podcast about Napoleon's rise and or, around the French Revolutionary time and just the various wars and so forth that have went on. Obviously the War of the Roses is something that inspired Game of Thrones. But is there another historical period where you would really want to explore, use a character from that time period to really talk about contemporary
Yeah,
life potentially?
before I started writing Hild, I was actually considering writing something called the Carnelian cycle, which was,
Hmm.
I don't know if you remember the beads that Hild wears, the
I
carnelians.
do.
Yeah, those are actually, oh, I wish I had them here. I would show you. They are my beads. I have the
Oh wow.
carnelians. I have 73 carnelians that were dug up from various graves, Greco-Roman graves in Egypt. So these things are 2,000 years old. Um, and I was thinking about writing a series of novels about the owners of these beads over the years. I was going to start in Egypt in about 150. I was going to go to the north of England in about 300. I was going to go to Ireland. I was going to go to Iceland. I was going to go all over the world. But the minute the minute history gets to like laws and parliaments, I lose interest. I like the unknowable. That's what I write to find out. And if we already have everything written down, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not so interesting to me.
Yeah, administered history is boring. I will agree.
Well, and like that brings me to wanting to ask you some questions about your craft. So,
Mm.
thinking about the life of Hild and how you would have written that in both book one and now in Menewood, um, what does plotting that book look like? What does outlining look like? Because as you say, like we have a little bits of information and then 10 to 30-year gaps. Do you start with sort of her life and then, yeah, would you mind telling me how you outline?
How I began with this was when I was still thinking it was going to be one big book. I got a huge piece of sort of butcher paper and then another huge piece and stuck them together. So I had this piece of paper about 8 feet long and 6 feet high that covered an entire wall. And I divided it into 66 years,
Hmm.
every year of her life. And I thought, oops, no, I should begin before then because it's important I know what happened before. So basically, I split it into 100 squares. And then I started thinking about what happened in each of these years.
Mm.
Who who became king, what languages changed, who emigrated, who died, who was born. And I just started filling it in like a big jigsaw puzzle. And then I would look at the things that interested me, like, oh, a battle. I love battles, right? They're
Right.
exciting. It's hard to go wrong with a really good battle. So every battle was in red, and it was like, let's do something with that. Um, and so there were certain very large events that were a big part of Hild's life that you have to include, like her baptism, her joining the church, her founding Whitby Abbey, the synod, and so on and so forth. And then I thought, well, okay, what are big things in a person's life? It's those moments as children where when we're about, say, 7 or 8, and we finally realize that what's happened before is kind of connected to what might happen in the future. We have this sudden brain architecture reaches the point where you can suddenly look out and connect the dots in a ways that you couldn't before. And then I thought, what was the biggest change that happened with the conversion in the 7th century? And I thought, you know what? It's about literacy.
Hmm.
So then I thought, oh, well, Hild's going to have to learn to read. So what would that do? What would that trigger in her head? How old would she have to be? Who would she learn it from?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And then how would she meet that person? And so it became this organic evolution. Um, and then as I wrote, I would think of a scene, I think, aha, and I would write it. And then someone I'd never heard of or expected just walks through, and it's like, oh, well, bloody hell. Now that person's very interesting. I have to follow them. That's how Begu came up. That's how Uladus came up. These people, they just appeared, and I thought, wow, I like them. I want to put them in more. What can we do with her or
Yeah.
him or yeah.
I liked them too. Thank you. Thank you for bringing them
So,
to the world.
so, so, in that vein, like you're essentially writing what amounts to a historical epic, and
Mm.
I've recently was rereading the book Dune prior to watching the movie, and one of the criticisms of both the book and the recent movie is that the abruptness with which things happen, and particularly the ending. And so I want to ask you a question about pacing. They say that pacing is the execution of a story, right? We can have the best story in the world, and yet you seem to have been able to master pacing, um, in this series. And so being that it is such this long, decades long journey that we're on with Healed, and so I want to ask you, how do you go about knowing that the pacing is correct, in your books?
I have no idea.
It's the most honest answer we've received on this ever on
No,
this
I mean,
podcast. No.
really, here's the thing about writers. We always say, oh, well, here's how I do it, and here's what I meant to do. And honestly, 9 times out of 10, that person is fibbing to you because we don't know. I mean, we think we can look back. We're storytellers, right? We
Mhm.
look back at what we did and we vaguely remember how we were feeling at the time. And so we invent a story that fits those points. But how we actually do it, writing is like it's like this black box. It stuff goes into it and it mulches and it breeds and it plays games with its little friends, and some die and some live and some have babies and they change, and then one day you open the box and there's this amazing thing inside. It's all you, it's all the work, it's all me, it's all the work I have done, it's all the thoughts I have had, but it's not quite under my conscious control. There's My subconscious is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and I don't always have access to that.
Mm. So, that being said, right? I mean, at the end of the day, right? As you know, as a reader, I think that we can sort of tell like, oh, okay, this doesn't seem to rush, it doesn't seem hurried, or it doesn't seem too slow. So, is it then in terms of just in terms of like a practical point, is it just going back and being like, you know, just knowing by feel, if you will, that you're rereading your work and you're like, yeah, this happened right where it should happen. This is the rhythm of the story that fits well for me.
Yes, and there actually, now that I'm thinking about it, there is a way for me to know what is the right timing and what is wrong timing. I think every single scene in a book should do at least three things. If it's not doing three things, you don't need it, or you should add the things to it to fatten it up. So it needs to, um, you only need three, but there are many different things you could do. You could be moving the plot forward. You could be deepening the reader's understanding of the time and place. You could be learning more about the character. You could be just delighting the reader. So you have all these choices, but each scene has to do three things. Frankly, I think every paragraph should do at least three things. And so for me, I know I'm getting the pacing right when it feels like it's moving along because it's got this heft to it.
Mm.
Um, and I mean, things can this happened and this happened and this happened. Things could go lightning fast, but if it's only one thing happening at a time, it feels thin. It feels like you could probably reduce that because it's just stuff. There's no emotion, there's no learning, there's no joy, there's no fear, we don't learn much. So yeah, it's a it's a craft thing and a story waiting thing. It's so intuitive as well.
Mm.
It really is quite difficult to talk about. I wish I'm going to have to think about this to try find a better way to explain it, but that's about the best I can do for now.
I think that was more than satisfactory.
Yeah, I was
So-
gonna say, like, if that is you not knowing how to talk about it,
Right.
woo, woo, you should hear me when I don't know how to talk about something. So we always like to end our episodes with a bit of a off-topic question. We call it apropos of nothing. And I'm going to cheat a little bit because you and I were chatting as we were getting everything set up this morning and ask you a question that because you already kind of told me the answer. In your lived experience, where and when were the hardest places to be a vegetarian?
East Lansing, Michigan, 1988. Very specific.
Wow.
I know I already know the story, but would you mind telling our listeners and Marcus the story?
Yes. In 1988, I was not very well off. I mean, I hate to use the word poor because I think there's a lot more poor people than I was then, but I had no spare money whatsoever. And I applied to go to a writing workshop. Let me back up even just a touch more. I was living in the north of England in a not very fun city called Hull. And I needed to get out. I needed to go do something different. I felt like I was stagnating. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go to a different country. I'm going to go do something in a different country. And so I applied to a women's martial arts camp in the Netherlands.
Oh, cool.
And I applied to a science fiction writing workshop in East Lansing, Michigan. And I thought, well, whoever accepts me first, I'll go there. I mean, it never occurred to me that neither of them would accept me. It was just like, yeah, I was young. Okay. So, but the science fiction workshop accepted me first and they gave me a partial scholarship. So then I borrowed some money from my mum and some from the bank, and off I went. But I still didn't have very much money. So I had a plane ticket and a return plane ticket that was non-changeable. And I was a vegetarian at the time, a very strict vegetarian. And I could not eat cheese. So I wasn't actually vegan, but I was very close to it. Now I eat meat and all that stuff, but back then I didn't. So I had bought a cafeteria card and I didn't have any spare cash. I had maybe $50 for 7 weeks. You know, it was
Yeah.
nothing. I had no extra money. And I get there and they said, oh, yeah, yeah, totally. We understand vegetarians. We're going to feed you well. I get there. Their notion of vegetarian food was cheese.
Oh,
Oh my
no.
goodness. Oh my-
There was nothing for me to eat. The first 2 days, I literally starved. I mean, I thought, okay, toast. I will eat toast for breakfast. And the bread was moldy. I am not kidding. I was
No.
just, I thought I was going to pass out. I was so hungry. Um, but then it actually what happened was I lost my temper. I burst into the cafeteria right through the like you're not supposed to go through here doors and said, "Who manages this kitchen?" And I basically dragged them by their little white coat collar. Said, "Can you eat this?" No. Here's why I can't eat this. The malt. Can I eat this? No. Here's why I can't eat this. The cheese. Can I eat this? No. Here's why I can't eat this. The meat. What do I eat? I have paid this card, this card. I have paid all this money. I have nothing to eat.
Yeah.
And after that, whenever I went to the line, there was a special pot of something delicious, like vegetarian chili or
Oh
something.
wow.
And everyone was like, "Oh, I want that." I said, "No, that's mine." So I had special meals. So yeah, that was the worst place for me to be vegetarian.
Thank you so. But it wasn't all bad, right? I feel like something momentous came from you
Yes.
doing that writer's
Yes,
workshop.
it changed my life.
Yeah.
I met Kelly there.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
Fell instantly in love.
Mm.
Actually, it was. I never used to believe in love at first sight until I met Kelly. I literally saw her walking down the corridor and thought, "Oh, fuck." Because I had a partner at home. You know, I had a mortgage, I had a
Mhm.
job, and I saw this woman. I thought, well, that's just great. Now what do I do? Because it was like every single cell in my body lined up and
Yeah.
pointed to her. It was like, have you ever done those experiments as a kid with the iron filings and the magnet?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
like that, just, and it was done. It wasn't like, oh, what should I do? It was done. It
Yes.
was like someone had turned a key. It was done.
Yeah.
So yeah, changed my life. I went back to the UK, left my partner, sold my house that wasn't worth very much, and moved to this country on a tourist visa because back in the day, it was illegal to even enter this country if you were queer
Wow.
or a communist or HIV positive.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
yeah, I had to
Wow.
leave the country every 6 months and come back in on a tourist visa.
Wow.
Where did you go?
I went to England and saw my family.
Oh,
Mm.
But
wow.
then the money was just it was
Yeah.
flying to the UK twice a year
Yeah.
was
It's like,
Sure.
how did you afford that? Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was very difficult. And Kelly was at the time was making $22,000 a year.
Wow.
I wasn't allowed to work.
Right.
So, I had this little stash from the bit of money I'd got from the sale of the house. I think it was £8,000 I had. And I spent all that and then we started building up the credit card. So after about 3 years of this, when by the time I was applying for visas and stuff, we were $20,000 in debt, and
Wow.
our annual income was about that. So we were in very
Wow.
bad way. But eventually we found the right lawyer, and my immigration case changed the law.
Well, this country is better for it, I must tell you, with your presence here, and as well as our city is. So I have to ask you, what makes Seattle special to you, or is it, other than just it's where you're at?
The weather, and I am not kidding. It's the climate. It's by that I mean the political climate,
Yes.
and the geophysical climate. We lived in Georgia for 5 years when I first came to this country, and I think one day in October, I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was still 72 degrees, 2 in the morning in October. And I thought, I cannot stand this another day. So I got out of bed and I opened the atlas of the United States, and I thought, okay, where could I bear to live? And I thought, Portland, Seattle, or Bellingham. So I got back into bed feeling satisfied. Kelly woke up. She said, what's going on? I said, we're moving. She said, what now? I said, no, go back to sleep.
Well, you chose wisely.
We got on a plane, yes, and we flew in to Portland, and we drove up to Seattle, and we never even bothered with Bellingham. It's like, this is great. They have
Yes.
good beer. They have good chocolate. They know how to make tea. They know how to make coffee. They understand cues
Yes.
and rules. I like this city.
And sometimes you get 4 seasons in one day. So yes.
Very, very like England.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. As our listeners can hear, you are such a natural storyteller,
Yes.
and it has been a delight to get to know you as a person and how that informs your writing. And Hild is such a great book. I'm going to be reading Menewood at some
Yes.
point this year. If anyone wants to start a book club with me, I would be thrilled. And we just appreciate your time and your literature and your contribution to Seattle and the literary world at large.
Absolutely.
Thank
This
you.
was our honor, and thank you so very much for today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening to Hinton Cast. This is all made possible by Hinton Publishing. If you would like to support the work that we do, please consider becoming a monthly supporter. If you go to hintonpublishing.com/support-hinton, you will see the many different tiers of support that you can sign up for. And no matter what your budget is, you can choose something that you will not miss at the end of the month. We want to thank Ben Hunter for this beautiful intro and outro music that we use. We want to thank Michael B. Main for recording the gorgeous audio of our conversation today. And we want to thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again at our next episode.